All right, guys, we are on day 4 or section 4. Today we're going to talk about absolute value. Absolute value is the distance from zero. So you have your notes page, so I want you to go ahead and write that down. Absolute value is the distance from zero. It is similar to the opposite, but I don't want you to make the same. It is not an opposite. It is just the distance, okay? And I'll explain that in just a second. So if you look at my number line here, if I have 4, the distance from 0 is 4, okay? So the absolute value of 4 is 4. It's 4 away from 0, okay? Um, it's 4 spaces from 0. The absolute value of -4, if I look at -4, oops, if I look at -4, what is the distance from 0? 1, 2, 3, 4. It's still 4. So the absolute value of 4 is 4, okay? All right, but I don't want you to confuse that with opposites, and I'll tell you why. First of all, let me just show you that this is the symbol of absolute value. So all right, so if you look at this, if I had, let's look up here. So if I had -5, so the absolute value of -5 is simply 5, okay? If I look up here, the absolute value of 7, again, how many spaces was that from 0? That is 7, okay? So that's why it's not an opposite. The opposite of 7 is -7, but I'm talking about absolute value. Please do not get them confused. The absolute value is not its opposite, okay? It is the distance from 0, okay? So you need to know that the absolute value is always positive. That's on your notes there, so write that down. The absolute value is always positive, okay? Because it is the distance from 0. You can't have a negative distance from 0, okay? So if you need to, star that, put asterisks by it or something. It's always positive. All right, so right above that, you had these 2 examples, which I just did. So make sure you write those down. So the absolute value of -5 would just be 5. And the absolute value of 7 is 7, okay? All right. So you've got 4 problems here. Will you go through and figure out the absolute value of these 4? Okay, pause the video and come back for your answers. All right, here's those answers. Just remember, keep thinking in your mind when you're thinking about absolute value. It is the distance from 0. So how far away is 6 from 0? It's 6. How far away is -3 from 0? 3 spaces. Okay, just keep thinking that it's a distance from 0. So this is 2 3/4, and the absolute value of -10 is 10. Okay? All right. Okay, we're also going to talk about real world situations. So write an absolute value to represent an account balance of -$40. So if I have -$40 and I want to know the absolute value, that would be 40. The absolute value would be 40. Okay, so that means you are $40 away from breaking even or being back at 0. Okay, write an absolute value representing an account balance of $25. So the absolute value of 25 is 25. That means you are $25 above 0. So you have $25 in your account. Okay, you don't owe any money. You are in good shape here. Okay, so you have $25. See the difference between these two? This one you're in debt up here because you're in negative. Okay, but you're still $40 away from breaking even. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about debt. All right, so I have a short little video that talks a little bit more about debt, and I think it's pretty good. So just listen to this for a little bit.
Let's look at money on the number line. As we move to the left on the number line, our numbers get smaller. When we're talking about money on the number line though, and we move to the left from 0, we're actually creating more debt or a greater debt. This is because as we move further from 0, the distance from 0 becomes greater. As we move closer to 0, we have less debt because the distance from 0 is less.
All right, so down there on your notes where you have where it talks about debt, I want you to go ahead and write this on your number line. So the further you go to the left, below zero, you have more debt, and the number as you go right, you have less debt. So I want you to write that. Remember, look, that's going, that's all below zero here. So I want you to write those arrows. So to the right, sorry, to the left would be more debt, and to the right would be less debt. So if someone has a -5 and someone has a -2 debt, the -5 is in more debt, okay? But it's further away from zero, okay? So it's a little bit tricky to think about.
Here's another example. The submarine is below sea level. As it travels deeper or further from zero, it creates a greater absolute value. This is because as it travels deeper, the distance from zero or sea level becomes greater. As the submarine moves closer to sea level, its distance becomes less. At the beginning of the lesson, I asked if New York was -15 degrees and Chicago was -10 degrees, which city was colder? Let's use the number line and absolute value to help us solve this. When we look at the relationship of -15 degrees and -10 degrees on the number line, it appears that -15 degrees is smaller than -10 degrees. We need to remember the context of the problem, though. As we move further from zero, the distance from zero is greater. This means that as the number gets smaller, the absolute value increases and gets bigger. The further down the number line we move, the colder the temperature gets. Now, we know the absolute value or distance of -15 is 15. We also know that the absolute value of -10 is 10. Well, since 15 is greater than 10, we can show that the absolute value of -15 is greater than the absolute value of -10, which means that New York is colder than Chicago.
All right, so I think that video showed a little bit more about that you have to think about the context of the questions. If I'm talking about debt or if I'm talking about below sea level or temperature, the further it is to the left when you're talking about debt, the more debt someone has. All right, so let's look at debt here. Who has the most debt? So hopefully you wrote down on your number line, remember, if my number line is this way, the further I go to the left is more debt, and to the right is less debt. Okay? All right, so let's look at this little situation here. Johnny's account debt is -$50. Determine whether each person's debt is greater or less than Johnny's. So if Johnny is at 50, so let's say if Johnny's at 50, so here's my zero up here. Okay, so he's at -50. Okay, if I'm going by what's up here, if someone goes to the left of Johnny, this is Johnny, then that's going to be more debt. That makes sense, doesn't it? If Johnny owes somebody $50, if someone owes him 60, that's more debt. Okay, they have more debt than Johnny. But if I go to the right, that means they have less debt. All right, so let's see where Sue would fall. Sue has a debt of $48. Well, wouldn't that be about here? So that means she has less debt. And Kim has a debt of $50.52. So isn't that about right there? So that is more debt. And Tony has a debt of $49.75. So that's so close right there. But it is on this side of Johnny. So that is less debt. And Rob has a debt of 55, which is about here on this side. So that means he has more debt. Okay? All right, so here's your exit slip. I think you have a little bit of room on the bottom of your paper to do these 4 questions, and I'll be checking that tomorrow. Have a great day.